Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I am so psyched that you are hanging out with me today. I have a super exciting guest on the show today. His name is Jonathan Fields, and you might know him as the Good Life Guy. So I heard of Jonathan probably, I don't even know, 20 years ago, where he did this series of interviews, and he was asking people in the world of self-help, what does it mean to live a good life? And it sparked this entire revolution, what people were saying. He started with 29 interviews, and I was absolutely captivated by his work. And he's gone on to do so many things. I was involved with, he's got an amazing podcast that I've been on called The Good Life Project, and he's also been on this show before. And I think that if you're looking for another amazing podcast, his is so incredibly great. And he has a new book out, and it's called Sparked: Discover Your Unique Imprint for Work That Makes You Come Alive, How to Live a Good Life and Uncertainty, Turning Fear and Doubt into Fuel for Brilliance. Those are his books. But what we're talking about in this interview is how you can get your passion back for what you're doing. So the current book is the one that I said at the beginning, Sparked. How can you get your passion back? Or how do you know what it is you should be doing in your life? Because so many people feel that they are stuck in a loveless or a passionless career, but they're sort of checking boxes and doing what it is that they feel like they have to do. So Jonathan has a way for you to figure out what you're best suited to do, and so that you can make the shifts that you need to make in your life. He told us the whole story. I hope that you are going to love this conversation that I had with my friend Jonathan Fields as much as I loved having it with him. I'm so excited to welcome my friend Jonathan to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Me too. Okay, so let's talk about passion. Let's talk about work. Let's talk about people having no passion for their work. Can we discuss that? And what inspired you? Because I just feel like this book, I was talking about it at the top when I was talking about your whole background. What inspired you to do this topic and this book now?
Yeah, so clearly I did not see coming sort of like the last couple of years where, the world has been thrown upside down, and now a huge percentage of people are revisiting the big existential questions, especially work. What am I doing with my life? But I have been fascinated with that very question for my entire adult life, probably in no small part connected to being a New Yorker who was in the city, living in Hell's Kitchen during 9/11. And that moment changed me in ways that, it rewired my brain and it rewired my heart and rewired the way I looked at the world. And I had always been fascinated with the question of human potential. How do we live good lives? And I kept pursuing it. And that set in motion a new business that landed me in the yoga world for a number of years, teaching, and then eventually writing books and speaking and creating media and producing. But over the years, the question narrowed down a bit to work, because it's the thing that we spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing. Few of us are going to do the old school retire at 65 and then kick back and then finally live the rest of our lives. It just doesn't happen anymore. So if you think about the fact that you're probably going to do this for the rest of your life, why not try and spend those hours doing something that fills you up as much as humanly possible, to the extent that it is available to you in your life, something that makes you come alive. So I've been deep into that question for years. And people have been coming to me asking that question for years as well. They'll usually ask that broader question, what should I do with my life? But what they're really asking me when they ask is, how do I find and do work that gives me that feeling of being alive? So I started deepening into it because I have explored that through different spiritual paths, Eastern traditions, philosophy, theology, spirituality, academic side of things, through the world of positive psychology and a ton of research in social sciences. And I saw so many really interesting pieces of the puzzle. So much of it was siloed, and some of it really sort of like very ethereal and not relatable. Some of it, and that would be potentially because it was overly spiritual, or it was heavily academic and there were some really good ideas, but 8 people would ever read the abstract that was related to it. And I started to really wonder whether there was some mappable set of impulses that were universal to everybody that would give you this feeling of coming alive. So I kind of had 2 questions in there. One is, are there those impulses that we can identify? And then 2, what's this word? Like, what is coming alive? What am I actually even talking about when I use that phrase? Because it's really kind of nebulous, and we use a lot of nebulous and ambiguous phrases. And I wanted to actually be clear about it. So I started to ask, like, well, what do I feel when I'm doing work and I feel that way? Like, what's actually going on? And I deconstructed that first into 5 different components. One is meaningfulness. I feel like, like what I'm working on actually is deeply meaningful to me, like it matters. 2 is flow. I'm able to access that state where I lose myself in the experience. I lose the sense of time. Mm-hmm. I lose a sense of me being individual or separate from the thing. It is an incredible state to be in. The 3rd one is what corporate folks would call engagement, but I translate to human language, which is just excitement and energy. I'm actually excited to wake up and do this in the morning, even if it's really hard and I'm going to spend a lot of hours doing it. And does it give me energy? The 4th one is what I call expressed potential, which is this feeling like we're actually tapping so much of what we're capable of and who we are. We're closing the gap between what we know we're capable of doing and what we're actually doing. And the 5th component is purpose, having an immediate sense of purpose. Like, I know what I'm working towards and it matters to me, but also more broadly, having a sense of purpose in life. Like, I feel like I'm doing the thing that I'm here to do. So once I mapped out those 5 different components, and that's the Venn diagram, the sweet spot in the middle is that state I would call being sparked or coming alive. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, so now I know what I'm actually talking about here. And interestingly enough, there's a ton of research on all those different domains. So I can look at what's been, like explored and examined and draw from that to a certain extent. And then I go back to that question of the impulses. Do we, are there a pretty universal and maybe remarkably small set of impulses that are, relatable across all different people, where it just compels us to invest effort in a particular way for no other reason than the way it makes you feel? And I started with literally thousands of jobs and started distilling those down and down and down. And what's under that? And what's under that? What's under that? And it landed at these 10 impulses. And I really dislike the fact that it's 10 because it feels way too slick to me. I wish it was 18 or 9 or 7 or something like that. The marker in me is like, this just feels way too packaged. But that's where we are. The scientist side of my brain says I always have to hold open the potential that deeper research may like change that number over time. But that's where we are right now. And then once I had those 10 impulses, I started to realize, you know what? Each one of these things has its own kind of quirky set of tendencies and preferences and behaviors that tend to be really common patterns for people who have that impulse. And I started thinking about mine and then sharing these with all sorts of different people and then a wider range of people. And was getting a lot of great feedback and also validation. People are saying, this is actually real and it's helpful and it's accurate. And, but for me, that's not enough. I wanted to see if I could either validate or invalidate these ideas at scale. So in 2018, kind of vanished into like my maker's lab, and we built an assessment, and I call these impulses, by the way, and the behaviors that wrap around them, sparketypes, which is really just a fun word to say. It's the archetype for work that sparks you. So in 2018. We spent basically an entire year developing an assessment, running people through it in bigger and bigger beta groups until it feels robust and accurate. We release it out into the world right around the end of that year, beginning of 2019. To date, well over 500,000 people have completed it, thousands more literally completing this assessment every week. We're sitting on more than 25 million data points. And it's done 2 things that are, one, I had no idea the response would be what it's been. It's kind of completely, if I had the hair on my head, it would have blown it all the way back. But on the one hand, it really helped us understand what these ideas are about. Are they real? Are they not real? And it gave a ton of data to understand them with more nuance. But the other thing that it did was we put this tool out into the world. And once we realized that it was giving some really powerful insights, now we also have something that is available to anybody. It's freely available. It's online. Accessibility around this is important to me. So we decided to keep it that way. Whereas
where can people, hold on, where can people take it? Just tell them right now, because everyone is like, wait, write it down.
That if you go to sparketype.com, which is SPARKETYPE.com, you can go and complete it yourself. It'll take you probably about 15 minutes, something like that, and give you some really powerful insights completely right away for free. And once we had that in the world, and then once we have hundreds of thousands of people moving through this, then we get second and third and fourth and fifth waves of qualitative data, of story after story after story, and use cases and applications. And then we take this into organizations, and we're talking to leaders about how this works. And we're talking to HR people and L&D people about how this works. So we're getting, just tremendous, tremendous insights. And that's sort of the evolution of this whole body of work. I'm still, probably 5 years into what started 20 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And the speed at which the insights are coming right now is kind of stunning. And it's just amazing to see the way that people are putting these ideas to work in their work and in their lives, especially now when so many people are questioning what they're doing.
What I find so amazing about this and the timing, and I took the Sparketype quiz myself, and I really want to encourage everyone to do it, because what I love about the questions is, and the instructions are like, this is not something you should speed through. Be really mindful, which I love too, Jonathan, because your stuff is very psychologically sound, but you were very clear to say, don't pick the answer you think you should pick, or that you think someone else thinks you should pick. And that may sound obvious to others, but I don't think it is. And I thought it really made me, I actually restarted the quiz. Like I was like, do it when your full mind is on it. Close every other thing down. And I really sat with the questions that really were deep, but of course answerable because it's my life. And that felt like it was really super accurate. And I think that part of what's amazing about this, and the people in the world, right? You put something out in the world and you don't know how people are going to respond. And when so many people are like, oh my God, this is what I've needed, it's so, of course, affirming to what you're doing, but it speaks to this collective pain that we've been experiencing. And it's not just now, but there's a really bright light I've seen in my practice and in my courses being shown now, with people being locked down, with people being forced to assess how they feel about their lives, their marriages, their careers, their work. And so why I asked you about the timing, because of course I knew you didn't have a crystal ball, and I knew you started this long before the COVID-19, but it's so perfectly situated for those who, if questions have come up for you, if you've always been seeking to be more passionate or sparked, as Jonathan says, this really is what it's about. And I think that from a psychological point of view, it's something like you've done something with this book that is really, really hard to do. You have. So kudos to you, because it is so psychologically sound, but you're really reaching into the depths of how people feel in a way that then is like, oh, now I know these things and now I can shift, I can do something about it. So would you tell us a little bit more about the archetypes? I mean, the Sparketypes.
Yeah, no, 100%. So there are 10 of these, and I'll just introduce them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So the first one is what I call the Maven, and the impulse for the Maven is learning. It's all about knowledge acquisition. You wake up in the morning and all you want to do is go to bed that night having discovered or learned something more than you knew before. The impulse can show up in a very narrow and deep way, like you latch onto a topic and you just become encyclopedic about it. Or it can show up as a really broad-based curiosity about everyone and everything. And then there's everything in between. And sometimes mavens will sort of mode switch. They'll go narrow and deep for weeks, days, months, even years. And then they'll just kind of like kick back into this ambient knowledge acquisition mode. But it's the ability to learn, which is everything, regardless of whether you ever apply that knowledge to some other domain, which also becomes one of the big stumbling points for mavens, because you can spend so much time just learning purely for the joy of learning that people who are not you will look at you and say, well, that is not a valid use of your time or your life unless you actually use what you're learning to do something else, to create a product or service that's of value to other people. And that creates a level of shame that doesn't need to be there, because this is just your wiring. So mavens often unlock that economic value, by the way, by tapping their position in a team or with other people as a domain expert, or by tapping what I call their shadow sparketype, which is sort of like their runner-up impulse or their next strongest impulse, which very often is more service side or sort of like value driven. So that's the maven. Behind that, we have the maker, which is my sparketype. The maker is all about making ideas manifest. It is the process of creation that gets you up in the morning. If I can just walk through life and be hyper generative every waking moment, that is what fills me up. Now, the maker creates a lot of stuff, and they have since they were a very little kid. They also can struggle with something, which is that in order to create and not replicate, you must live in the question. It's not a big deal when the stakes are low, but as the stakes start to rise, which they generally do in life and in work, that can create an incredible amount of anxiety, because you're living in the state of the unknown, of uncertainty. When the stakes are going up and up and up, you know this because of like so many of the clients that you've had over the years, and the way that they live in a very high stakes world where you just don't know what's coming next.
Yep.
So for a maker, for me, I have had to develop practices and tools to allow myself to be okay in that place, because I know it's the place that I need to be to really fully express myself.
Yep.
So behind that, we have the scientist. The scientist is about burning questions. It's about figuring the things out. That is the fundamental impulse. So burning questions, puzzles, problems. Most people run from those things. Scientists run to them. They cannot get enough of complex, nuanced problem-solving puzzles. They're the ones who will literally like go and buy an all-white 1,000-piece puzzle with rough edges and spend 3 years doing it, and they don't want anyone to stop them from doing it. Whereas everyone else looks at that and says, yeah, not a chance. Like that has zero interest in me. In fact, it makes me want to cry. So scientists, like they love that. And very often they'll latch onto something where what they figure out actually has tremendous value, either to them or to a team, an organization, or to society. So they tend to be really valued, and also find a pretty easy conventional path to earning a living through that impulse. Behind that, we have what I call the essentialist. Now, the impulse for the essentialist is to create order from chaos. It's about clarity and utility. But we've also learned something over the years, which is much more nuanced understanding. So when an essentialist takes a complex data set or a whole bunch of stuff or a warehouse full of boxes and things, which is a disaster, and then turns it into this incredibly organized system and process where everything is working and everyone understands it and there's efficiency, they don't just experience it as clarity and utility and efficiency. They actually experience it as elegance, as beauty. They'll look at that and feel like they have created art, which in fact they have. Right. So it's a really interesting thing. That Sparketype also, that work tends to be profoundly disliked by everybody who is not an essentialist, by the way, including me. So there is, tying into your work, there are very often major boundary issues with essentialists, because as soon as people realize they have that impulse, and very likely have become very skilled at it because it's the thing that they want to do, everyone wants to give them their work that falls in that domain. And they have to really learn how to navigate that, especially in different dynamics where they may be in an organization and not yet feel like they have the agency or the power or the control to say no.
Right.
So it's always a really interesting dance that they need to do. Essentialists would be really, really well advised to go deep into your work. I think it'd be incredibly helpful to them.
Yep.
So behind that, we have what I call the performer. The performer sounds on the surface like, oh, well, that's got to be about performing arts, like putting on a show. And in fact, many people with this impulse are tracked into the performing arts as young kids because it seems like the logical place to put their energy. But the truth is, the deeper impulse is simply to energize, animate, or enliven an interaction, moment, or experience. That can show up in the performing arts, and often it does. But it can also show up as a parent. It can show up as a coach. It can show up as a mentor. It can show up as a leader in an organization. It can show up in a business development or a sales meeting. It can show up as a bartender behind a bar.
Right. I was going to say someone who tells a great story or can teach, like a great teacher who tells a,
Absolutely. So one of the things you have to be really careful of is narrowing what you believe are the quote, like truly viable or available channels to express this thing, and understand it can come out in literally any context, any domain. And when it does, the impulse in the Sparketype is actually fairly rare. So you have a bit of a strategic advantage when you step into that place. Right. So next behind the performer, we have what I would call the warrior. Now the warrior is all about gathering, organizing, and leading. It's bringing people together, saying, I've got something, a reason for us to come together. And we are now all going to go from where we are now to go accomplish this thing that is deeply meaningful to us. Now, the impulse for warriors often shows up when you're very, very young in a very public, observable way. You may be the kid on the block who's bringing all the other kids together and saying, hey, we're going to go on an adventure. And you love the fact that you get to gather and then take the lead. Almost always, warriors, they're part of the group that they bring together. They're not sort of like from the outside in. Warriors, however, may also take a little bit of a hit when they're young because they may be seen as being bossy, because they're constantly saying, let's come, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And some people will really love and appreciate that, but some people will feel like it's a little bit too directing before you've actually earned the right to direct. And that can show up later as well. Yep. One of the things to be really careful of with this impulse is that there's often assumption that type of work should be done in a way which is sort of like dominance oriented. Like, I'm going to take control. I'm going to make the rules. I'm going to tell everyone where to go and what to do. And we're going to make this happen in a very aggressive, a very heavily masculine energy. And that, in fact, is complete mythology. Many of the most effective and most fulfilled people with this type do it in a quiet way. They do it from within or from the side in a very gentle, nuanced, vulnerable way. So you have the opportunity to step into it in a way that feels best for you. They can also be very lonely because very often they're the people who have to make tough decisions along the way. So it's not a bad idea to sort of like, over the years, especially if you're assuming that role in an organization or your work, to have your own sort of like council of people on the side to help you through it. Behind that, we have the sage. Now, the impulse for the sage is to awaken insight. The sage is all about illumination. Now, the sage may spend a ton of time learning, but they're not learning purely for the sake of knowing the way that a maven would be. The sage is learning because they want something to tell someone else. The thing that lights them up more than anything else is when they can stand in front of a person, a room, a group, thousands of people on a stage, whatever it may be, and share something that they find deeply important and see the lights of understanding illuminate in the eyes of those other people. It is an incredibly powerful thing. So, and also a very relational Sparketype. So sages also have a bit of a potential stumbling point, which is that the impulse often is so strong and shows up so early that you start sharing everything that you know before you actually know enough to share it in a way that is either intelligent or safe. Like you're kind of a little far out over your skis. So sages often learn later in life when they're like, this is what I know. And then people start asking questions and they're like, I don't know how to answer those questions.
Right.
That sometimes they have to temper it and go deeper to really accumulate a deeper depth of insight and knowledge before they really go turn around and leverage that impulse. So behind the sage, I think we're down to the last three now. We have the advocate. The advocate's impulse is to guide through a process of growth. And this is, again, very similar. It is a deeply relational impulse. It is about creating a container of safety and trust, and then walking beside a person, a group, a team, whoever it may be, generally over an extended period of time, as you help them navigate some sort of process that is deeply meaningful to them. It may not be an A to B type of thing or a defined outcome the way that a warrior would do. And generally, unlike a warrior, you're also not on the inside. Generally, you're somebody who's walking beside, not within. But you are somebody who serves as a coach, a mentor, an advisor, to help somebody move through their own process of evolution, of growth. One of the counterintuitive things about advisors is that functioning at the highest level, advisors actually generally don't or rarely give advice, which is a little counterintuitive because many people who are advisors will say something like, oh yeah, I'm the one that people have been turning to my whole life for advice. Everyone comes to me, like I am the person who gives advice. And in fact, that may be true. But when you become more skilled at it, what you start to realize is it's actually much more valuable to not give advice, even if you think that you have sound information to share, but to create a really such safety and trust, such a deep relationship with this other person or group that they will allow you to guide them through a series of questions, inquiries, and prompts that will elicit the insight, the awakening, the process of growth from them, rather than you just sort of like ordaining the information or the answers. Which is really important because A, you could be wrong, and then you share in the blame. But B, you're also, when you just keep doling out answers and information, you create dependence rather than independence. You create
just like parenting,
exactly.
Like parenting.
Yeah.
You
Right.
want
It's
them to learn
codependence
the
effectively.
skills. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's always something to be really, really careful about. And you'll see the highest level advisors, they rarely ever actually tell you what to do or give you direct information, but they're masterful at helping you get to that same place yourself and then taking ownership of it, which is so much more powerful. The final two, we have the advocate. The impulse of the advocate is all about championing ideas, ideals, individuals, and communities. So you're the person who feels everything and you see things that just aren't right. Maybe it's an idea that is being offered by somebody who's quieter in a boardroom and it's a good idea, but nobody's paying attention because this person maybe doesn't have enough clout or whatever it may be. And that bothers you. It literally is just not okay. There's an injustice, literally, even if it's a minor issue and a modest idea, and you feel the need to stand either beside or for, or help shine the light and champion. And it can be as small as something like that. It can be as big as some of the big society-wide issues that we've been dealing with for generations now. But for you, you cannot just be a bystander. It has been a part of your DNA from the youngest years and has probably shown up from the youngest years. And depending on the context, you may have been considered in some places a powerful ally or a powerful advocate or a powerful representative or spokesperson or champion. But especially younger in life, you may have also been called a troublemaker or a rabble rouser or somebody who was always, basically saying things that were causing a lot of issues and friction and tension. Because this impulse is really, really strong. It is one that I've seen in sort of like the more qualitative side of what we've seen is just brutally hard to stifle. And when you do, it causes so much pain that eventually it explodes out. So that brings us to our final one, which is the nurture. So the impulse for the nurture is to elevate. You're all about lifting others up. You give care, you take care, often when others don't or won't or can't. This is a deeply empathic impulse. So if you feel this, you probably are doing it not just because you feel the impulse to lift others up, but also because on some level you feel what they're going through, and their feeling becomes your feeling. And this brings us zooming right back into your recent work, which is about boundaries. Talk about being able, how important it is for the nurturer to establish healthy and dynamic boundaries to like your body, your recent body work, and your recent book. Like, nurturers and essentialists probably should all be just encyclopedic in all the ideas and techniques that you share, because you can end up gutted very quickly, and then you're of no use to anybody. So those are the 10 different sparketypes and how they tend to show up in different people.
That was it's all so fascinating. And it's like when you guys listening or watching this on YouTube go take the quiz, you'll see that it's the nuances within the questions that are going to help you end up with your right sparketype. Because here's the thing that I'm seeing and why I'm so psyched that you're doing what you're doing right now in this moment in time is that people are burnt out, that, they're calling it the great resignation, right? That people are experiencing this. And this book is really a how-to guide of knowing yourself. And it is therapeutically based because you do know yourself, you know the answers. When I was reading the questions, I was like, yeah, this is either you or this is not you. And I think that there's a shift that's coming where we're putting this value, as much as people are fatigued from what we've been going through, we're also putting a different value, because what you had said at the top, Jonathan, about how 9/11, the trauma of 9/11 became this massive power pivot in your life. It changed you changed. I feel like this lockdown situation, this COVID situation, this global pandemic, for many people has created a very similar experience of collective trauma, where same old, business as usual was massively interrupted. Now, most of us would not have interrupted that ourselves of our own accord. We believe, so many people, I used to be in the entertainment world and lots of different places where there is a full-on belief, like, we have to do this, whether it's a photo shoot, whether it's a television show, whether it's literally the show must go on. And what we learned throughout this period of time was that maybe not. And it didn't. And TV shut down and everything shut down for a period of time. And now things are starting to open back up and have been in the last, let's say 4 to 6 months, but very carefully. Right now, this work and this modality that you've created, because it's really a methodology of people finding what really does light you up. Because if you are listening to this and you've had this experience of the great resignation, where you're just like, wow, I guess this is just the way shit is. This is a call to action. This book is a call to action. And it's really, Jonathan, everything you do, because I'm always so into all your stuff. So it's always a movement. You're never just be like, here's a book. It's always like community and movement within that. So tell us a little bit about, so if people want to get the book, where can they get it? And then what else is there around the book? Because I know there's more than that.
Yeah. So the book is called Spark, and it is available at booksellers everywhere. So anywhere you want to get it, you will pretty much find it. In terms of what's happening more broadly, we've got the tool, the Sparketype assessment, which you can take online. And, it's interesting because in the past, when I've done things, we've built very intentional community and specific containers. And I'm in this really interesting moment with this body of work where I'm holding that part of it very lightly. And I know that we have some online things where people can come together and find people like them. But what I'm actually more interested in right now is seeding the idea, giving a bunch of insight, and then calling people to actually discover this about themselves. Mm-hmm. And then once you do, you will have language that first allows you to see yourself more clearly, and then describe your inner world to others in a way that maybe you really struggled to really let them know this is who I am. And this is sort of like why I do what I do and why I need what I need, to actually then go and just individually share that with people around you, your intimate partner, your friends, your family, your colleagues, so that you can have this sort of like expanding ripple of being seen, being understood, and then being equipped with the ideas and the skills that would allow you to step into work in a way that is more meaningful and purposeful. Those 5 components we talked about that allows you to come alive. And I'm holding this really lightly because I feel like we're in a moment where that ripple, that expansion needs to happen in a very organic, a very intimate, and a very individualized way. And that, people are going to create their own mini communities, mini groups, mini relationships around the world. And we're seeing it already. Like, so much of the feedback is, I learned mine. And immediately I had my entire team, like in my company take it. And then I had the entire, we'll hear from a CEO who says, I've had the entire company take it. And then, like we've done work with the executive leadership team of a company with 250,000 employees, so it's taking these really different forms. And you're right. In the past, we've created some very well-defined containers for how these ideas move out into the world. And I'm pulling back from that right now, because I want them to take a much more organic life out in the world on their own. We are building programming and stuff like that because people are asking us for it. But the fundamental idea, it's really take the assessment. It's free. Learn this really cool thing about yourself. If you want to go deeper into it, the book will give you so much more nuance and context and stories and insights. And then just share it. Like start to have conversations around it, because it'll change the quality of your relationships and the way that you choose what to say yes or no to in the context of the work that you do. And in turn, the way that you feel when you're doing it.
Well, I am so excited that this book is now in the world. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for spending so much time with us today. You guys, all the information that you need, will be in the show notes. You want to go get this book. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.